Now, 50 major infrastructure projects will be cancelled in a sweeping overhaul of the Grand National Plan to manage such things over the next decade. Overall, the government maintains it's not cutting funding, only projects which were either stalled or far from fully planned. Now, the states won't see it that way. Some will now have to pick up the tab themselves if they wish to proceed with these projects. Here's some of what Infrastructure Minister Catherine King's had to say in her presentation of the review of the $120 billion the Commonwealth is slated to spend on infrastructure for the next 10 years.
50 projects that have been cancelled as part of this process. In terms of the flow of cash, that will come out in the mid-year economic financial outlook, so we are not releasing that today, and I'm sure that will be of great interest to you, having had you write about that. But you are right. On average, if you look across the $120 billion 10-year pipeline, the most the Commonwealth manages to get out the door in projects is between $10 to $12 billion, and that has meant significant problems when you see underspends and the way in which the pipeline currently exists. So part of this exercise has been ensuring that we do smooth that pipeline, because we know we have got considerable constraints when it comes to labour costs and supply constraints as well. And as the IMF has said, we don't want to add to inflation, so smoothing that pipeline is really critical, and that will be all revealed in terms of the cash flows, the way in which that works in my EFA. We're not doing that today.
I get the sense that has some potential to become highly charged, somewhat controversial in disputes lying ahead with the states. We will talk about that with our political panel a little later. Let's introduce them first. Labor MP Susan Templeman is here. Welcome, Susan. And Liberal MP Zoe McKenzie back with us too. Same to you, Zoe. Just hold the thought on infrastructure for now. There's a bit on that in your electorate too, I noticed, Susan. But we end up with a wild ride to exactly the same position as far as government and opposition are concerned on immigration detention. I'm not sure how we got there, but if this legislation was so urgent today, Susan, why wasn't it introduced on Monday?
I think we were dealing with a decision by the High Court that turned over 20 years of precedent, and it isn't sensible to rush into something. It is worthwhile considering what the options are. I think 4 days is pretty quick turnaround, but I'm also very mindful that we haven't seen the High Court's reasons for the decision, and we also, in addition to the measures that we're taking now, things that we think are very sensible steps to take, I know we will be looking very closely at those reasons to see if there are additional things that.
So were you spooked into it if the government's disposition, and it looked like it was to sit, wait, get reasons from court, legislative necessary, then it came in a real rush today? I still can't square that.
I think you get advice, this is not a one bit of advice and then you say, okay, that'll do us for a while. You get advice as people have the capacity to work through various issues. I'm not a lawyer. I'm certainly not a bureaucrat to think through the consequences. And I think what we do is we respond to new information, or we respond to the updates that we get. And so I think it's really good that we have done this and when we say we need to do it now, it's because we have not only been able to draft really sensible legislation, and that's something I noticed in previous parliaments. Often legislation had to be changed because it was a rush job. But this one is a piece of legislation that will stand up to testing. It's obviously still being debated, and we won't see exactly what it is until, we hope, later tonight.
All right,
as it gets out of the Senate.
Yes, Susan's oozing confidence there, Zoe, that these will be constitutional. They won't cause any bother to the High Court of Australia. No one in the Parliament can actually assert that, can they?
Can I say Susan's put the most kind and considerate way of what's happened this week. Look, in the High Court discussion in June of this year, Justice Gleeson raised an observation about the fate of these people and that they might be in indeterminate detention. From that moment on, this government was on notice that they needed to be thinking about what might happen if there was an adverse decision. If there's one thing we have discussed a lot in the last 6 months, that the High Court occasionally does take vastly different decisions to break with previous practice and it's dramatic in its effect. I've been in the Attorney's office when we've had to rush legislation in to address something that's happened at the court. It does happen. It happens often enough for that when you hear a judge say, but this might be the consequence, you get moving on what might be worst case scenario. So there should have been legislation of some sort ready to go. The government has been brought to this conclusion, kicking and screaming, we're getting there, and we all had a duty to make sure that when we went home tonight or tomorrow, Australians, particularly those that have been victims of these non-citizens' criminal acts, feel safe in their bed.
I know, and I hear what you say, others have too, about the government court napping, not being prepared. Then again, it could equally be true that they had done some preparatory work. I cite as evidence that the explanatory memorandum today alone ran to 70 pages. It's unlikely every word of that was written overnight last night.
It may well have been. There are an army of parliamentary draftsperson people who would have been working on this in the last sort of 24 to 36 hours, precisely because we made it clear we weren't going to let anyone go home unless something was done. And so, to their credit, they've got it done. We got briefed, the opposition got briefed at 7 o'clock this morning, and it's been a full day of collaboration, as Susan rightly pointed out. We have ended up in the right place, and it may well be that we need to come back to it. But again, just to have some degree of security and safety for the weekend and a non-sitting period of 10 or so days, it's the right thing to have done.
Well, that's almost done. One last one on this, Susan. Hardened criminals, said the opposition. Despicable, says Claire O'Neill about some of the released former detainees. It seems to hint that the government and officials obviously know more about the character of these former detainees than we do. Are we entitled to find out in what categories they fall with their former criminal conduct?
I can understand why people want to know more details about the circumstances, and I think it's really important that we take the advice of the law enforcement agencies around what happens next. And you know, Zoe talks about this having been hints that there might be something 6 months ago. Well, that time has been used to work really closely and collaboratively with our state and territory agencies. That's not just one agency, that's across the country with different agencies in different ways, so that many things are in place to keep people safe and to ensure that when the decision did come down, and you never know exactly when that's going to be, that there were already things in place that could kick in. And I think it was right to have that as the first priority. The legislative response is the next step, but initially the things that keep safe. And we should be guided by our state law agencies.
All right, well, there may be more to come when you return to Canberra. If not this year, then
if
maybe
not tonight.
next. Well,
Who knows?
let's see. It's been